Two of the favorites to win this tournament, and it is going to be the Rillaboom making an appearance here, immediately pressuring Fake Out. Feels really awkward into Zamazenta, of course, right? But it is going to be a solid Pokemon to put on pressure. Obviously, can Grassy Glide to break the Calorex's Focus Sash as well. And so here we go. First defense boost comes out from Michael's end.
Of course, now you do have the grassy terrain hitting the field, a little bit of recovery for all of the Pokemon that are going to be connected to it. But I also take a look at something like the Grassy Glide. I mean, when you look at these Pokemon, I think you have to pay attention to the fact that Shadow Rider Calyrex could get its Focus Sash broken by that really early, and then it makes it a bit more vulnerable to an attack later.
And it's just going to be a double protect to start from Michael's end. I think this is smart. You kind of just want to see, is there a potential Terra commit on the opposing end? If you Fake Out with the Rillaboom, you do pressure with an Encore immediately afterwards. And so it's going to be that double protect to start.
Yeah, and likely a Fake Out that went into that Zamazenta as well. So it's just a safe turn here. I think Michael doesn't want to get too risky with anything, especially because of how many ways that turn could have potentially gone wrong. And you've got Zamazenta and Shadow Rider Calyrex, I think, in a pretty good position versus what Marco has.
Yeah, I think the main scary thing is this next turn, you are threatened by a Grassy Glide, which of course would go before that Encore, as well as a target, the Heavy Slam onto the Shadow Rider as well. And so, okay!
Oh boy! There is a threat of Wide Guard from this opposing Zamazenta, and so is that something that Marco decides to go for? Or is Michael going to run away with this second turn of the game? You've got this Terra Racialization on top of the Astral Barrage as well, so this Calyrex is looking mighty scary.
And the idea is just to increase Astral Barrage damage. No Wide Guard comes out, but it makes sense because you're trying to go for probably a double up onto the Shadow Rider. So Astral there does decent damage. We saw Zamazenta get the defense boost first. Body Press comes out, and it doesn't get the knockout!
This hang on from the opposing Zamazenta is critical. You're dealing over 50% damage to the Zamazenta on Michael's side, and you break the Focus Sash with the U-turn on this Rillaboom. What a turn!
Such a big survival, especially because it wasn't the Wood Hammer on the Shadow Rider, it wasn't Grassy Glide and the Heavy Slam. It actually ends up being U-turn. So I think Marco there was kind of saying, look, if you stay in with Shadow Rider, I will break your Sash. If not, you might switch out the Shadow Rider because you would think it's going to be Grassy Glide plus a double up, right? And so I think Michael, if he got in that knockout, he would have been in such good shape. Now Shadow Rider from Marco's end ends up coming out. There's Wide Guard support from both ends, but this is one of the things. If you are going to be slower than my Zamazenta, it means you're probably a little bit bulkier, and that little bit of extra bulk is what Marco needs to survive there. That probably was a damage roll that turn.
But now we have to pay attention to the speeds of these Shadow Rider Calyrexes. I think that's another thing, especially when you're looking at these big, powerful, restricted Pokemon and the mirror. Can Michael move first? Maybe does Marco not Wide Guard?
Yeah, the Wide Guard war is so interesting here. You can see Michael going for Wide Guard plus Psychic. I think generally a pretty safe play here. And so this means no Astral Barrage, but it means Marco has the opportunity to go for something like a Psychic or a Nasty Plot. Both players going for Wide Guard, but let's see, did either of them actually lock that Astral Barrage? So risky to click right now. It's going to be Michael's Calyrex moving first, which is to be expected here. I think the main question is, would Marco actually run max speed on his Shadow Rider? But it's going to be the first knockout going Michael's way.
Definitely a knockout you would have liked to get, but now it's going to be the Shadow Rider Calyrex cleaning up that Zamazenta, gives it that boost, and the Shadow Rider Calyrex on Michael's side does survive that Psychic.
And so this is the logic behind bringing Rillaboom, right? Like, it's not great into Zamazenta, but you can use it to just slowly force your way into the Shadow Rider. Actually ends up being the Ogerpon here, but crucially, this Ogerpon does have Grassy Glide as well. So Marco now in this position where you do just threaten with Grassy Glide onto the Shadow Rider and then a Psychic into the Zamazenta slot. Then the question I have is Zamazenta bulky enough to take a Psychic? It's not boosted, but of course it is Life Orb on the opposing end. But it's been a back and forth in terms of trades here. We see the final two Pokemon in the back. It is going to be the Dragonite and the Chien-Pao, which I think is really cool.
It does give you that extra priority option so that you can move before those Grassy Glides as long as that grassy terrain is active. But you're going to protect this Calyrex first, hoping to bait out something like that Grassy Glide. And that's exactly what happens there from Marco, as it unfortunately goes right into that protected Calyrex. But this gives valuable time here for the Zamazenta to potentially make another move. It's going to have to take this Astral Barrage first. So if it can hang on through this, then it's able to get an attack on,
there
and it does survive! No way!
Oh my goodness, that's huge. You get a gigantic body press off into the Ogerpon. Now, I mean, hey, Dragonite does have extreme speed in the back. It can just keep extreme speeding into the Ogerpon. Rillaboom can't fake it out either. Going for the Astral Barrage there, gets so much damage off, but just falls short. And in this game, it's been really both Zamazenta surviving just with a sliver of HP. You can go for another Grassy Glide now, right? And so you could switch out into, yeah, either the Chien-Pao or the Dragonite. And then the question is, does Marco capitalize off that? You could go for a wide guard here instead of a protect. You can see Michael's really debating between the two, but he's like, you know what? I'm going to protect here. That gives me wide guard for one more turn.
Oh my goodness. It could still, like, Marco could still get back into this, I think.
Absolutely.
Especially if he's able to capitalize on what Michael has decided to lock into. It's a protect here. So, but Marco is looking unhappy with this one. I think he's going to be upset with the damage. As the Grassy Glide into the Dragonite, you're not going to be able to pick up the knockout onto that opposing Shadow Rider Calyrex. And it was just this, oh, is this Astral Barrage? I thought it was just a Psychic into that Zamazenta. That would have been crazy. But of course, the Dragonite takes that. Really critical to survive that particular attack.
Yeah, big deal though, because you could tell Michael was considering that wide guard. Wide guard would have been huge there. You get your Dragonite in relatively safely. So Marco maybe actually was like, oh, okay, I called it right, but it didn't look like that from the camera, right? And so I think that's a huge deal because now you've just gotten so much damage across the board. And so this is still really, really scary. Everything is so low at this point. We're actually seeing a gamble here. It's going to be the Dragonite pivoting out, but this means that your Zamazenta is vulnerable to just getting knocked out right now.
Yeah, and especially when this Shadow Rider Calyrex is so much faster. At least you don't have the grassy terrain, but the Psychic is plenty for this Zamazenta to get knocked out, and now that's a nice boost going over to the Shadow Rider Calyrex here from Marco.
Yeah, two back-to-back fantastic turns by Marco. You even get an extra attack off with the Ogerpon as well. It is going to be the Ivy Cudgel. That's super effective, and Chien-Pao is down. It felt like Michael had so much momentum, but he was gambling that turn a little bit, and it just ends up being Zamazenta fainting, and now you're down to your final two Pokemon at such low health.
Wow, and you still have that Rillaboom in the back,
yeah.
So you can switch it in, set up the terrain again, and that is whatever KO you want with the Grassy Glide.
Oh my goodness. It feels like Marco is just really showing why he's been such a phenomenal player this season. And the Astral Barrage, I mean, this just shows how crazy Lifeorb Astral Barrage Calyrex is, right? And so Marco not clicking that wide guard a couple of turns allows Marco to just keep getting damage and damage and damage. And so down to the final two Pokemon here. You do have extreme speed and Astral Barrage pressure, but Marco can consider switching in that Rillaboom, turning the terrain on. It's actually not going to be a switch, though.
But that's a terrestrialization. You actually saw that extreme speed go into that Shadow Rider Calyrex. It would have otherwise been immune, but now that Marco has decided to terrestrialize into that Dark type, you are definitely going to have to take that.
But it's
at least you do have to follow me, so there is still a safe play that Marco could play around, but could you imagine if that didn't happen and Ogerpon still gets knocked out?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's like, if it's not a follow me, then you do get the extreme speed off into it, right? I like the gamble here, but it's not going to end up being enough. This Dark Terra now timed perfectly from Marco's end, conserves it all the way until the final turn of the game. It's going to survive, and now Astral Barrage will be a double knockout in return.
Congratulations to Marco Silva. What a great game number one for him, and especially having to kind of make the comeback after those first couple of good turns there from Michael, but we got to start thinking about this game number two.
I really think, yeah, Rillaboom and then the double Grassy Glide pressure makes this a lot harder for Michael Shadow Rider. And I was actually kind of surprised to see Shadow Rider being led on Michael's end, because I think it's often like the Pokemon that you want to close out the game with. So leading it honestly just makes it a lot more vulnerable. But I think it makes sense because maybe he, wanted to just like apply immediate pressure right from the get-go. I mean, if you got the knockout on a Zamazenta there as well, your Zamazenta would have been so much healthier, then would have been able to likely survive even more attacks from the opposing side. So that was definitely a back and forth battle. I think the Pokemon choices make sense from both players' end. Michael just gambling that game though on the switch into Chien-Pao, hoping to just get a knockout with that sort of rune. But yeah, Marco just calls and it's like, I'm just gonna knock out your Zamazenta.
It's a tough decision to have to make. Okay, maybe it was a sigh of relief that I saw. It's really hard to tell sometimes because of the intensity of the moment, but it is really, really hard in this particular format. And I don't think we can stress enough how challenging it is. Sometimes you do have to make these very risky calls, because if you get it right, you win. That's what it's going to take.
Exactly, and I think this game would actually look completely different. The one turn I really want to point to was just when it was Ivy Cudgel plus the Psychic and just a double up there. I think Michael was maybe hoping, well, you know I have wide guard pressure. Are you really going to click Astral Barrage again? You also could switch into Rillaboom, and so he was thinking, well, if I switch into Chien-Pao, it ends up being Psychic into the Chien-Pao slot, and I get the Heavy Slam in Sword of Rune. That might be enough to just win the game, because if you eliminate the Shadow Rider from that point, Dragonite absolutely cleans up. And so Michael basically was like, I'm going to go all in on this turn, but Marco says, I'm not going to give you that opportunity, and ends up responding. And I mean, to get a double knockout like that, Chien-Pao didn't do anything, right? And I thought it could actually be a possible Terra candidate coming into this matchup.
That's something that Michael can adjust to in this game number 2, but I think Marco has so much critical information from that game 1. You know, Michael's Zamazenta and Shadow Rider Calyrex are faster. So how do you now take that and turn that into an asset for your game number 2?
Absolutely. And I think Rillaboom and Ogerpon made a lot of sense, right? It's like, okay, I don't care if you're faster if I have Fake Out pressure and I have Grassy Glide pressure. And so I really love how Marco ended up using both of those in that matchup. I think it makes sense to drop Incineroar and Raging Bull here, right? Incineroar is not going to be incredible into the Dragonite. The Chien-Pao actually doesn't really care about attack drops because it is this Ruination set. You do have Ghost Hair on Incin here, but it isn't a Will-O-Wisp set on the Incineroar, so it's not as good into, say, dealing with Zamazenta. I could see both players honestly running it back. I think for Michael, a lead change maybe makes some sense, but let's see.
Well, for this game number 2, it is going to be that Zamazenta and Rillaboom again here for Marco, and Michael's content. Just going to run back. The Shadow Rider Calyrex and Zama.
Yeah, I mean, Michael might be saying, look, I had actually a pretty good advantage in that last game, and things just all completely collapsed on that one crucial turn when you Psychic my Zamazenta. So, and it was also like the Zamazenta on Marco's end barely hung on in that last game. It'd be a different game if you get the knockout. So, question here is, do you kind of just go for the safe, double protect once again?
Oh, another risky turn. It paid off last time, though. So if Marco decides to not click wide guard again, then that is still so much damage landing onto both targets. And that's the name of the game of the Shadow Rider Calyrex, is you want to have good damage trades. Let's see this Terastallization.
Yeah, so like I said, coming into this, normally with these Shadow Riders, you kind of save it until the end game. But now Michael's like, you know what? I'm just going to go all in on offense early, get some Astral Barrages across the board. And so for Marco's end, it's going to be the Grassy Glide, and so Shadow Rider will likely faint this turn if it is going to be the Heavy Slam. No Fake Out coming out. And if Marco knocks out Shadow Rider this early on, it's an amazing start for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, this Astral Barrage still is able to do quite a bit. So now, can the Body Press actually goes into the Rillaboom? So a knockout here for Michael, but can Marco deliver the same intensity for this first turn? Big damage trades here, and the Heavy Slam knocks it out. One Pokemon down a piece, and Marco is so happy with this turn.
Yeah, I mean, you got the Terror out, right? Like, Shadow Rider got a little bit of extra damage off, and that damage actually may be important to, one, knock out the Rillaboom with that Body Press. And we actually see an adjustment here with the Ogerpon instead, but I think it's a really, really strong start for Marco here. Rillaboom is not actually that big in this matchup other than to enable either Grassy Glide or threaten with Fake Out and get Terraina. You want to use it specifically to deal with Shadow Rider. Like, it's not that good into Chien-Pao or Ogerpon, and so I think that Marco is probably more than content from that turn.
Yeah. And now you've got your own Hearthflame Ogerpon in front of this Chien-Pao, and it cannot Terrastallize away. What a great position here for Marco.
So I think this is interesting because Michael committed that Terra, right? And so you can't go for something like Ghost Terra. You are incredibly, incredibly vulnerable to Body Press from the Zamazenta. What Michael does have going for him is that his Pokemon are faster, right? So you can threaten with like a Ruination plus a Body Press, for example, and try to get a knockout. You could also, go for it. That's exactly what looks like he's thinking about. The risk here is if Zamazenta protects, but it's just going to be follow me. So it's going to be a trade most likely. You knock out the Ogerpon, but you also lose your Chien-Pao.
But I think you're okay with that as well, because I think you would really you like the Ogerpon in front of this Chien-Pao, but I think like getting rid of the Ogerpon is great for Michael. Now Marco gets a chance to fire back another attack with this Zamazenta. But I think the question is, like, which do you think is going to be the bigger threat? I think the Chien-Pao makes a lot of sense just to get rid of that Sword of Ruin. And now, wow, what a quick game two.
It's so fast. Yeah,
the final two Pokemon for both trainers? What?
Knockout after knockout after knockout. And yeah, I think eliminating Chien-Pao is a big deal because it's just so good into the Shadow Rider with that Assault Vest set. And so I think for Michael, in theory, Assault Vest Chien-Pao should be really good if you have it out against Shadow Rider, but it's never been the case. In game one, it just faints till the Ivy Cudgel, and in this game, also fades before it gets to hit the field. And so Ogerpon now the new adjustment from Michael's end. It will give some redirection support, but this is looking pretty scary, I think, for Michael.
Oh, you gotta get the wide guard turns right. You still have this
Crucially,
Yeah, you gotta...
I will say, crucially, it is going to be the Water Terra from Marco's Zamazenta, right? So that means that if you Water Terra, you are weak to the Ivy Cudgel from the Ogre Pawn from Michael's end. And so...
True.
You probably don't want to Terra Dark the Calyrex here, right? That doesn't really help defensively, so you might Terra... As you see, yeah, he's going for the Power Whip Body Press, saying, look, if you don't Terra, I just KO you.
Oh.
Calyrex protects. Is it a double protect? Because if not, Michael is instantly back in this one. I would say he actually might even win.
Oh,
but
it's a double protect though. Okay. But now Marco knows. Michael was really trying to go for the gold there with the double attack into the Zamazenta, and I think Marco can safely play around that now.
Yeah, the other key question I have here is like who is faster between the Zamazenta from Marco's end and then the Ogre Palm from Michael's end, right? Because if you are slower, that's going to be a nightmare for Michael, where then you can just get hit by Psychic plus a body press and just get KO'd. So if Michael has some sense of Marco's Zamazenta speed stat, could consider going for a spiky shield and a body press, for example, instead. And so looks like just opting in. You could also go for Power Whip into the Calyrex. Grassy Terrain is up. That actually will likely just get a one-hit knockout. So let's see. Splitting the damage this time, not going for the double up. And here's the Terra. Who's Terraing? You would think it's going to be Zamazenta.
You would think so.
Yep.
But you never know sometimes
Yeah.
if these players want to play it a little bit riskier. But the Water Terror here from the Zamazenta definitely feels a little bit better. But with this Astral Barrage moving first, there was no Wide Guard. So both of these Pokemon are going to get hit. This Ogre Pawn, of course, has this sturdy ability, which is going to allow it to hang on with 1 HP. But who is faster now between this Ogre Pawn and the Zamazenta from Marco? And it's going to be the Ogre Pawn first.
But it targets the Calyrex, and so now the question is Zamazenta will likely get a knockout with Body Press. Who does it target? Is it a double up into the Ogre Pawn slot? It is! So now there is no threat of Power Whip anymore into Zamazenta. It is a war between these two Zamazentas, but Marco has the defensive Terra to save him.
It's the attrition for sure at this point.
Yeah, and imagine if it was just Wide Guard Power Whip that last turn, I think Michael ends up winning this game. But he still can win. He's got the faster Zamazenta, going for Protect here. Oh my goodness, the question is, can Michael survive a body press from the opposing end? Because he's certainly not going to get a knockout onto the opposing Zamazenta with this first body press.
You do get a little bit of Grassy Terrain recovery, so the protects do make a bit more sense. Maybe it helps you survive a little bit more comfortably than you would have before, but now the Grassy Terrain is gone, the gloves are off. Let's see these Zamazentas match up into each other. The body press is going to be a little tough there. And I think Marco has this.
He survives, but I don't think Body Press is doing enough. I think this is going to survive. Let's see. And it hangs on with the Sliver.
Was a 3-hit knockout there, and Marco with the final body press. He's going to win this set 2-0. And now move into the rest of the World Championships. Day number 1, still undefeated.
How many times did Marco click Astral Barrage in the face of a potential Wide Guard? Feels like at least 3 or 4 different times between games 1 and 2. Gets it right every single time there. And there was the opportunity potentially, I think, for Michael to have just gone for